Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in speaks on the phone for the first time with his new U.S. counterpart Joe Biden, the two agreeing to work on a comprehensive strategy on dealing with North Korea. The Moon administration announces a plan to build more than 800,000 homes across the country, its latest bid to cool down the market and ease a housing shortage. And South Korea again reports more than 400 cases of COVID-19. The government's considering a relaxation of the distancing rules, but that'll depend on case numbers coming down. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Our starting point this afternoon, the first phone call between President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Joe Biden. President Moon called for joint efforts to denuclearize the Korean peninsula, and Biden promised Washington's cooperation on that and other issues. Our senior Blue House correspondent, Kim Min-ji, has more.
President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Joe Biden have agreed to draw up a comprehensive strategy to deal with the issue of North Korea. The two leaders spoke on the phone Thursday morning Korea time for about half an hour. The call comes 2 weeks after Biden was sworn into office on January 20th.
President Moon called for joint efforts for denuclearization and lasting peace on the Korean peninsula. To this, Biden said it's important they share the same stance and that the U.S. closely cooperate toward those shared goals. They also agreed on the need to map out a comprehensive North Korea strategy.
President Moon is seeking to get his peace initiative on the Korean peninsula back on track, with hopes for resumption of denuclearization talks with North Korea. The fact that Biden agrees on the need for cooperation raises expectations that talks could gain fresh momentum under the new U.S. administration. Moon and Biden also expressed hope that they can further strengthen the Seoul-Washington alliance, key to regional peace and prosperity, to a comprehensive and strategic one. They also agreed to expand cooperation on global issues such as tackling COVID-19 and responding to climate change. The two leaders also noted the importance of trilateral cooperation involving Japan and shared views on other regional players such as China, although the Blue House did not elaborate on the details. The White House confirmed their agreement to coordinate closely on North Korea and Biden's commitment to the bilateral alliance, calling it the linchpin for peace and prosperity in Northeast Asia. With the two leaders in close contact, attention will now be on whether they can kickstart efforts to get the Korean Peninsula peace process going again. President Moon has just over a year left in office, so the clock is ticking. He and Biden agreed to meet in person for a summit at an early date once the pandemic eases. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And now the latest on the COVID-19 situation in South Korea. The country reported 451 new cases on Thursday, so it's in the 400s for a second day. There have been several cases of the new variants this week. And as for distancing rules, the Prime Minister is calling for more public participation in making them. Choi Jung-yoon has more.
South Korea reported 451 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday. This puts the country in the mid-400s for 2 straight days after being in the 300s earlier in the week. Of the new cases, 429 were locally transmitted and 22 were from overseas. This brings the nation's total number of cases to just under 80,000. Health authorities are on high alert ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday. Sporadic cluster infections from restaurants and cram schools continue to rise. And the country saw its first case of the UK COVID-19 variant transmitted domestically. Analysis on Monday found 4 patients contracted the UK variant and 1 with the South African variant of the virus. Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun called for the government to swiftly investigate people with any slight possibility of contact with the infected patients, stressing the importance of preventing the spread of the more transmissible strains. As the variants were transmitted between relatives and weren't detected at the border, he stressed the need for more efficient measures and the need to ensure there aren't any loopholes in self-isolation procedures for those entering the country. He also asked the government to come up with a new set of social distancing rules. Though the restrictions have been acknowledged as being effective in halting the spread of the virus, there have been complaints that they aren't fair. Certain businesses like cafes and gyms have been hit extremely hard by the restrictions.
If social distancing is inevitable until the herd immunity is produced, it's more about how, rather than why, that will determine citizens' participation in virus prevention measures.
Instead of health authorities notifying the public of restrictions unilaterally, citizens will take part in revising the rules, as they are the direct subject of following them. Choi Jung-yoon, Arirang News.
In its latest bid to cool down the overheated real estate market and ease a shortage of homes, the South Korean government's planning to supply an additional 830,000 homes by 2025. 320,000 of those will be in Seoul. This is the 25th real estate package from the Moon administration and one of its most ambitious yet. Ji-young has this report.
In the biggest housing pledge by the Moon administration so far, South Korea will build around 830,000 new housing units across the country by 2025 to try to slow down runaway house prices.
This is twice the annual supply of housing nationwide, and it is also about 10% of the existing housing stock in the entire city of Seoul. With this massive supply shock, I'm certain that the real estate market will stabilize.
Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport Byun Chang-eum revealed the details of the plan, dubbed Public-Led 3080 Plus. Of the new homes provided, 616,000 will be centered in the capital region, including Incheon and Gyeonggi-do province, with 320,000 in Seoul.
300,000 is 3 times more than the current housing units in the city of Bundang and about the same as the number of units in the 3 districts of southeastern Seoul combined.
He also said 30% of the new housing supply will be for housing subscription, and anyone who hasn't owned a home for 3 or more years is eligible to apply. The allocation system for new apartment units will be upgraded so that more people ranging from newlyweds to non-home owners in their 30s and 40s can have the opportunity to buy their first homes. The government will provide sufficient housing by redeveloping areas near subway stations. They will also encourage redevelopment of areas with many low-rise buildings by raising the residential floor area ratio to up to 700%, which will allow developers to construct buildings higher. Also, the government will reconstruct semi-industrial areas into residential zones. It plans to establish high-density public housing in the center of cities and will speed up the process by giving out incentives and loosening regulations for related parties, including the developers and property owners. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Last year, data show South Korea faced a record number of restrictions on trade imposed by other countries, stopping Korea from sending them goods to protect their economies. Officials say the situation is unlikely to improve this year. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea faced the largest amount of import restrictions in 2020 as countries around the world scrambled to protect their economies amid the COVID-19 pandemic. A total of 228 import regulations from 26 different countries were imposed on South Korea last year, up 18 from the year before. This is according to the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency's report on import regulation trends published on Monday. The import restrictions include anti-dumping tariffs, countervailing duties, and safeguard measures. Anti-dumping duties accounted for 72% of the total restrictions, with 164 cases. Cases for safeguard and countervailing measures accounted for 24% and 4% respectively. By country, the United States enforced the most import curbs with 46 cases. This was followed by India, China, Turkey, and Canada. 66% of the restrictions placed on South Korean goods were newly imposed by countries such as India, the Philippines, and Thailand. Product-wise, limits on steel, metal, and chemicals accounted for more than 2/3. The rest included curbs on plastic, rubber, textiles, as well as electronic goods. The report also says South Korea will be further hit by heightened trade barriers this year as countries seek to impose carbon border tariffs in a bid to become leaders in the green and digital economy. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Shares of the U.S. video game retailer GameStop are down more than 70% from last Friday when the price was near its peak. Investors had pushed the price up in January by around 1,600% to put the squeeze on hedge funds that had shorted the stock. According to the New York Post, one trader who helped spark the rally lost more than $13 million in a single day as the price crashed on Tuesday. Apple is reportedly close to reaching a deal with South Korea's Hyundai-Kia automotive group to build Apple-branded self-driving cars. That's according to CNBC, citing sources it says are familiar with the matter. The sources say the tentative deal would have Kia make the cars at its plant in the U.S. state of Georgia, where Kia has spare capacity. But they also note that Apple could choose to work with another company instead of or in addition to Hyundai-Kia. Reports have said Apple's shooting to start having the car produced in 2024, but the CNBC sources said that could be pushed back. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon, and thank you for coming on today.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, the government today announced another set of measures to address the shortage of housing in South Korea. This is the 25th round of measures, and this is going to increase the supply of homes across the country by 830,000. Tell us about these measures, Professor.
In previous more than 24 times of government housing market policies, the weakest part was no action for housing supply. So I'm glad to hear that government has finally decided to supply 830,000 apartments. This massive housing supply would be the only solution to stabilize housing market. And newly provided apartment amounts to the size of 3 times of Bundang area apartments. And to facilitate apartment construction, government also deregulates restrictions on rebuilding and reconstruction.
Yeah, as you allude to, the previous measures, a lot of them have focused more on restricting lending and people's access to borrowing to raise the prices ultimately. But now moving to the markets, Wall Street stocks were up overnight just a bit. The NASDAQ was flat. There's been a fair bit of upbeat news this week, but this was one of the smallest swings we've seen in a while. What's the story in the global markets?
U.S. market was mixed yesterday between Dow Jones and NASDAQ. Dow Jones increased by 0.1%, but NASDAQ marginally avoided negative return at 0.2% return. Biden administration's expansionary fiscal policy gave positive effects on the market, but delayed distribution of vaccine and Republican Party's opposition on Biden administration's fiscal expansion gave negative impact on the market. Other Asian markets and European markets had negative returns due to investors cashing in from previous investment.
And Korean stocks down quite a bit today. Local retail investors, big buyers, while institutions and foreigners were selling. Tell us what happened on the Kospi and the Kosdaq.
Yes, that's correct. There were large drops in domestic markets today. Kospi decreased by 1.4% and Kosdaq also dropped by 0.6%. Foreign investors and institutional investors' big sales led the market to negative returns. After rise of stock for a long period, there were profit-taking in particularly large capital stocks like Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, except Hyundai automobile related companies.
And of course, a big story around the world in the past week or so has been short selling on the market, and the South Korean financial regulators are extending the ban on that practice until May. It was going to expire in March, a year after it was imposed to prevent volatility in the pandemic. But in the meantime, they're going to allow investors to short a small portion of the biggest local companies. So, Professor, help us understand what the FSC is doing here.
Ban on short selling is a hot potato in both of the financial market and political arena. Actually, the temporary ban on short selling is scheduled to be lifted on March 15th. But short selling became a socially and even politically sensitive issue as the practice mostly benefits institutional investors and foreign investors with deep pockets. So that makes more tolerant to risk for big investors like foreign investors. So the growing pressure from retail investors voicing concerns over possible damages in battles with sophisticated institutional investors like hedge funds. Under envisioned measure, only large cap stocks listed on the benchmark in KOSPI and KOSDAQ are allowed for short selling practices, and this is a measure for stabilizing additional market volatility.
Financial market regulations front and center here in South Korea right now. Professor, we're going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.